I am co-founder and CDO of Hactar. We're a product and service design consultancy, and we work primarily with organizations in the social good space. I'm going to talk today briefly about UX, a little bit about designing for good, and a tiny bit about designing for sort of financial services and the future of money. So when I was first invited to speak, I wondered how I was going to compress UX into sort of 10 minutes or so. Not that straightforward, but after a lot of sort of scribbling and shuffling of notes, I kept coming back to a couple of words. One is efficiency and the other one is process. And the two are kind of, after all, sort of inexplicably linked together. One of the things we focused on before setting up Hactar was the streamlining and simplification of our process. And we approached designing an agency in exactly the same way we design products for our clients, by using this sort of iterate and optimize approach. So we work smarter and faster, which means we're never really engaged in making huge things that might be a load of bloated old rubbish. And our clients like it for two reasons. One, if it's not quite right or it fails, doesn't really matter, try something else. And money. Obviously, this kind of way of working translates into savings, and everyone likes savings. And that's kind of what UX is intended to do. It's intended to mitigate risk. And we do that in part by gathering information, data, and opinions before making any sort of key design decisions. Sometimes that's on a very grand scale. You know, that can be months of research, meticulous planning, or it can be a little bit sort of off the cuff, based on sort of reckons, a bit less strategic, but nonetheless impactful. Some of you will likely go on to work in large organizations where you'll discover that changing a process is a bit like trying to stop a container ship. Even if everyone in the business realizes that something is desperately wrong and it's clear that there's still a better way of doing things, in a big company it will still take months or even years to change it. Part of the problems that organizations are facing is that they're paying lots and lots of money for things they don't really need. Shiny, pointless PDFs that have a shelf life of about a week and have a readership of about 5, and then they're stored away somewhere, never to be read again, and that's about it. So, as a business, if you are paying for this, then that's money that you really could be spending on innovation. Your time could be far better spent coming up with ideas rather than creating documentation. And fidelity can cripple. In the design technology industry, there is a thing called technical debt. There's also design debt, which you should all be aware of. If you've not experienced it yet, then you are almost guaranteed to run into it at some stage in your career. And it is painful, and you will remember it. So, when we talk about digital products and services, what is technical debt? Well, technical debt is where you find a sort of shortcut for now. And that shortcut over time will accumulate in interest as your system or your idea gets more complicated. So basically, the longer it's left unresolved, the more money and time it's going to take to fix it further down the line. So there are clients that ultimately don't really care because they have too much money. But as we see smaller and smaller organizations with real budgets reaching out to large agencies, there's a real sense that kind of transparency and honesty about process are worth almost the same or more as an award-winning team. When we talk to clients about our methods and the way that we use, design products, what we're actually helping them to do is buy into a process that rarely ends with this big bang. As I sort of mentioned, I worked in games for 3 years, working with people like Konami and Nintendo and Microsoft, and the games industry is basically deliverables, because you've got producers. It's like the movies, but games. And publishers would often set this expectation that every single month, every 3 weeks, every sprint, they would want a very shiny car. Like the 350,000, 500,000 they had spent that month, they want to see it. They want to see a visual representation of where they've spent their money. And if they didn't get that, they would get really stroppy. So even if the thinking was amazing, even if it was innovative and smart, and they could, there was real value in the research and the work you were doing, where's my shiny thing? As a result, we were burning days and days of budget and time and resources to have these lovely PDFs and presentations, so they could be printed out and put in frames. They were never framed, and they were always clearly scrutinized for exactly the wrong reasons. And this is clearly... So, how about me/you? So start small, start controlled. and start with a hypothesis. Now, a hypothesis is basically just an idea. It's a thing you can sort of prove or disprove, and you start with the smallest possible thing for the least amount of effort. Now, not in a lazy way, so this is creating the smallest thing you possibly can to prove or disprove a hypothesis. Now, that's sort of for testing and validation of your idea, whether that's flushing 56 chicken nuggets down a toilet or whatever. And if you don't know what the thing is, start with an exercise, start with an activity. Use other people as sounding boards. If you do have an idea of what the thing is, start with a sketch. If you've got an idea of what the medium is going to be, start with a sketch. And test with that sketch. Do not be afraid to show people your ideas. Keep away from glass. You might feel like it's the safest place to be, or your best friend, or where you feel most comfortable, but it is not. It is actually your worst enemy. And with a brief like this, or actually pretty much any brief, pushing pixels can be slow and it can be painful, and it will just, you'll end up dragging your heels trying to push stuff behind glass. By building that small thing though, it can be easily controlled and modified. You're always going to be in a position where you can just roll back, take a step back from what you're doing, bolt on a new thing, and you're not going to break, the whole thing. You're not going to open yourself up to design debt. If you're working in pixels, in Photoshop, Illustrator, Sketch, whatever, you make a single change to a flow or an idea, and that has a ramification over the entire project. That's design debt. That's going to really impact on your time. And I'm hoping that I can elicit an appropriate amount of sort of trust and confidence. Having spent years doing it both ways, my preference is this sort of minimum viable product approach. So start with the small thing. And the nice thing is, if your first idea fails, feasibly, you will learn something, and the next time you do it, with that new insight, you could get something totally unexpected and wonderful, in a good way, maybe. And that's the nut of it all. This is just being open to change, being aware and unafraid of change. Keep on pushing for the smallest possible thing. If needs be, look for the problem and go down the line. If you're writing notes, look up the 5 whys. Look up the 5 whys, and the 5 whys is a really useful technique. You keep asking why 5 times. And that's a process that Toyota invented. That's kind of interesting as well. There's a good wiki page on that. A couple more things. Gather opinions. Ask as many people as you possibly can what they think of your idea. Just go out there, speak to people. If you're unsure about the sort of feasibility, go and find a specialist. They're out there, they're nice, they tend to, be friendly to talk to. And do not get sucked into creating a huge future. It's a slippery slope. It's this chasm, this embankment that you will feasibly slide down if you try and create something too grand. This is not going to be the solution. This is not that sort of MVP solution. Some of the smartest ideas are the ones that are piggybacking existing technologies.